The cave does not open so much as erase. First the air cools, then sound shortens, then color begins to fail. Limestone closes over the world in layers laid down by vanished seas, and below them water keeps moving through cracks too narrow for light to follow. In these flooded passages, time seems to collect instead of pass. A salamander drifts out of the dark with the softness of an afterimage skin nearly white, eyes reduced to shadows or lost altogether, red gills trembling like exposed threads. It looks unfinished, as if the animal has been stripped back to an earlier draft. But nothing here is unfinished. Everything has been revised by darkness. Today we're diving into why cave salamanders lose their color the deeper you go. Not because caves bleach life by magic, and not because every underground species becomes a ghost, but because in a world without dawn, every visible trait must answer a harder question: what is it still for? At cave mouths, the old world still lingers. There is green water, drifting leaves, the faint rhythm of day and night. In those boundary zones, salamanders can remain recognizably surface animals, still carrying pigment, still using vision, still living in a place connected to weather, seasons, and predators that hunt by sight. But farther in, beyond the twilight zone, the rules change completely. Darkness becomes permanent. Temperature narrows. Food arrives in erratic pulses, from floodwater, washed-in detritus, microbial production, or the droppings of bats roosting overhead. The phrase "the deeper you go" is less a statement about meters than about commitment. Some salamanders use caves, others become cave specialists, then cave prisoners, cut off in aquifers and submerged chambers for thousands or millions of years. Across those transitions, many lineages show the same broad pattern: eyes shrink, pigment fades, bodies elongate, sensory systems shift, and metabolism slows. The deeper zone is therefore also an evolutionary zone, where the traits of surface life begin to lose their authority. Among four-limbed vertebrates, that transition is extraordinarily rare. Birds and mammals are too metabolically expensive for a world this poor. Reptiles are efficient, but most remain tied to outside heat and dry land. Salamanders, especially certain lineages, arrive with a very different set of possibilities. They are ectotherms, inexpensive to run. Many are small. Some remain aquatic through life, retaining larval features instead of undergoing a full terrestrial metamorphosis. That matters in flooded karst systems, where underground rivers and pools form a hidden landscape more suited to an animal that never needs to leave the water. The same traits that make salamanders seem delicate on the surface, thin bodies, moisture dependence, nocturnal habits, become advantages below ground. In North America, species of Eurycea repeatedly enter subterranean waters. In southeastern Europe, the olm, Proteus anguinus, becomes the continent's great cave vertebrate. The story of color loss begins here, not with the disappearance of pigment itself, but with the arrival of a body plan capable of surviving long enough in darkness for pigment to stop mattering. On the surface, color does many kinds of work. Pigment can help shield tissues from light, especially ultraviolet radiation. It can assist with camouflage, conceal an animal from predators, shape temperature balance in exposed habitats, and sometimes contribute to communication between members of the same species. But in subterranean water, several of those functions weaken at once. There is no sunlight to screen out. There is no need to match bark, leaf litter, or stone for the benefit of a predator's eye if vision is failing across the food web. A pale salamander is not more conspicuous in absolute darkness, because nothing there is conspicuous. Once selection stops strongly preserving pigment, mutations that reduce pigment production are no longer punished in the old way. Over generations, that relaxed pressure allows color to thin, fragment, or disappear. And in nutrient-poor caves, even small savings or developmental trade-offs may matter. Researchers studying cave vertebrates increasingly describe regressive traits like eye reduction and depigmentation as the outcome of both relaxed selection and active selection, rather than one clean mechanism alone. That loss is not always immediate, and it is almost never absolute in a single step. Cave salamanders form a spectrum. Some retain traces of melanophores, the pigment-bearing cells that once darkened skin more fully. The Georgia blind salamander of Florida and Georgia is described as white with yellow or pink tints. Not as a featureless blank, it still carries the visible signature of blood, skin, and tissue beneath reduced pigment. The Texas blind salamander shows something even more revealing across its life stages. Juveniles may possess small pigmented melanocytes, while adults have little to no dark pigmentation. In other words, the cave does not simply subtract color as if flipping a switch. Pigment is gradually abandoned, often unevenly, and sometimes development itself still remembers an ancestral plan before adulthood completes the cave-adapted form. The deeper you go, evolution seems to say, the less often color is maintained to completion. Nowhere is that transformation more iconic than in the olm. In the Dinaric karst of southeastern Europe, an animal once imagined as a dragon larva lives in groundwater that may never see the sun. The olm's skin is yellowish-white to pinkish, thin enough that the underlying circulation gives parts of the body a faint, living glow. External gills flare red from the head. The body is elongated, the limbs small, the face drawn forward into a narrow instrument built for a world of stone cracks and still water. Pigment loss here is part of a much larger redesign. The olm is not merely pale. It is one of the most specialized cave vertebrates on Earth, a species shaped by perpetual darkness, low food availability, and the unusual stability of subterranean water. In that setting, coloration no longer helps it evade sunlight, signal to mates across distance, or vanish against a changing background. The cave has removed the stage on which color once performed. Yet the olm is not a simple emblem of loss. Even here, where eyes have degenerated so far that adults may show no obvious remnants externally, the animal is not senseless. Mechanoreception, even electroreception, along with elongated olfactory structures and cranial changes that support life in darkness. Historical work and modern reviews also indicate that Proteus retains some sensitivity to light, whether through residual sensory cells or skin-associated responses. That detail matters. Pigment disappears in a world without useful vision. But the body does not become indifferent to the environment. Instead, it reallocates attention. As vision loses value, other systems deepen. Cave adaptation is not a collapse into simplicity. It is a transfer of investment. The same evolutionary process that lets color fade can sharpen the senses that still return information. In the dark, what survives is not what looks most complete to us, but what continues to pay for itself biologically. The olm's life history pushes that principle further. It matures late, reproduces infrequently, and can live on a timescale that feels almost geologic for an amphibian. One study estimated an adult average lifespan of roughly 68.5 years, and a potential maximum exceeding a century. Sexual maturity comes after many years. Reproduction is sparse. Activity is limited. These are not luxuries. They are the arithmetic of living, where calories are rare and unpredictably delivered. In such a system, every unnecessary expense is suspect. The cave does not reward flamboyance, it rewards endurance. The olm's famous pallor belongs to that broader economy. It is one component of a low-waste existence, alongside slow metabolism, extreme starvation resistance, and long-term maintenance of the body. A white salamander in a cave is not evidence of frailty. It is evidence that natural selection can favor subtraction, when subtraction helps an animal survive the longest famine. Across the Atlantic, the Texas blind salamander offers a different version of the same logic. It lives in the Edwards Aquifer, an underground system of water-filled voids and spring openings beneath central Texas. This salamander remains fully aquatic and neotenic, carrying external gills and larval form throughout life. Its head is broad and flattened, its limbs long and slender, its eyes reduced to tiny non-functional vestiges. Adults are largely without dark pigmentation. Even more striking, recent work on Texas Eurycia salamanders shows that as subterranean lineages reduce their visual systems, they augment the mechanosensory lateral line, the distributed set of neuromasts that detect water movement and vibration. Eye reduction and sensory compensation evolved together in multiple cave-colonizing lineages. That pairing reveals why color vanishes so often underground. Evolution is not just letting the visible world fade. It is actively moving investment towards senses that can operate in permanent darkness. Pigment loss is one face of that shift. The other is a body learning to feel currents where surface relatives would have looked. The Georgia blind salamander, living in underground streams and pools in the Floridan aquifer region, appears almost spectral for similar reasons. It is small, permanently aquatic, eyeless and pale white with pink or yellow tones, red gills, a long, flat head. But its appearance is not just a cave cliché repeated in another species. It is evidence that widely separated subterranean systems can produce similar answers from different starting points. The physics of darkness do not vary much from Florida to the Balkans. Light remains absent. Food remains sparse. Water remains the dominant medium. And again, color loses its leverage over survival. This repeated convergence is one of the most important clues in subterranean biology. Evolution can arrive at depigmentation again and again, not because one mutation is inevitable, but because the cave keeps asking the same question and discarding the same expensive or obsolete replies. Food scarcity turns that abstract principle into something brutally concrete. In Oklahoma and Missouri cave systems, researchers documented larval grotto salamanders, consuming bat guanoyan astonishing behavior, and the first reported nutritional coprophagy in a salamander. The finding is more than a curiosity. Batagano can dominate cave food webs, delivering pulses of protein and energy into otherwise meager environments. For a salamander, eating guano means cutting directly into the main subsidy. that keeps the underground ecosystem alive. It is a reminder that cave evolution is governed not by darkness alone, but by darkness paired with chronic hunger. In such places, broadening the diet can matter more than preserving ancestral elegance. A salamander that once belonged to a more straightforward predatory world becomes an opportunist, taking energy wherever the cave leaks it. Seen in that context, the fading of pigment belongs to a larger biological pattern. Cave species survive not by becoming more ornate, but by becoming ruthlessly economical. Even so, scientists are careful not to oversimplify what color loss means. Depigmentation is often described as a hallmark of cave adaptation, but it is not a universal law, and it may arise through more than one route. Some traits disappear because they are no longer maintained by selection. Others may be reduced because resources and development are redirected elsewhere. In cave vertebrates broadly, studies increasingly point to mixtures of relaxed selection, genetic drift, and adaptive trade-off. Salamanders complicate the picture further because many cave forms are paedomorphic, retaining juvenile traits into adulthood. Developmental timing itself becomes part of the evolutionary machinery. That may help explain why pigment can persist faintly in younger stages, why some species keep scattered melanophores, and why different lineages arrive at similar pale bodies through slightly different developmental paths. What looks, from a human perspective, like a simple bleaching is actually a record of altered priorities written across generations. So the title's question has an answer, but not a neat one. Cave salamanders lose their color the deeper you go, because deeper cave life means less light, fewer visual interactions, harsher energetic limits, and longer evolutionary separation from the surface. But deeper is really a proxy for something else: duration in darkness, isolation in subterranean water, and total dependence on senses other than sight. The entrance world still rewards some of the old features. Permanent groundwater does not. Over time, pigment becomes less defended, less completed, less worth maintaining. The result is not one identical white form repeating forever, but a gradient of abandonment species and populations, in which color thins from pattern to patch, from patch to scattered cells, from cells to almost nothing. The cave is not actively painting salamanders white. It is simply no longer preserving the colors they once needed. And still, much of this world remains hidden from us. Most cave salamanders live in spaces divers can barely reach, and instruments sample only indirectly. Aquifers conceal whole populations. Developmental pathways are only partly understood. The exact balance between drift and selection, between savings and side effect, is still being worked out lineage by lineage. Even the pale bodies we know best may keep histories we have not yet learned to read. That may be the most humbling part of the subterranean story. We descend with lights and cameras, and what we find are animals defined by the collapse of light's importance. They endure in water that remembers ancient rain, in corridors carved long before human language, wearing bodies that seem to us reduced, though reduction is the wrong word. These salamanders are not lesser versions of surface life. They are evidence that evolution does not move toward brightness, spectacle, or complexity for its own sake. Sometimes it moves towards silence, patience, and the disappearance of color into a darkness we still barely understand.